speaking of Pandora Directive, speaking of the branching paths in Pandora Directive, apart from the canonical ending, which is, the hollow date thing, which of the endings in the game is your favorite ending?
Clown.
It's such a toss up. This is so apples and oranges because I love that clown ending so much, but the Chelsea ending is so satisfying, and I think it's a perfect cap on a Tex Murphy story because it's like he finally gets the girl, but instead of it being they ride off into the sunset, in some romantic thing, there's one last joke, one last kind of kick in the pants to Tex. Thinks he's going to get lucky, and he's probably not. So,
well, I think he is, or at least Chelsea is, and it's much more of a whip crack than a kick in the pants. But yes, and you really have to steer the ship to get that ending. Like the other ones, fair enough. You can bumble. There's like 4 endings to the Boulevard. There's 2 endings to Lombard Street, but there's only one direct path to Whip City, and
that is pretty much all that one conversation before the Fuchsia Flamingo.
That's
the hardest conversation in interactive movie history.
Yes.
Well, if I can, I mean, obviously, I put a lot of work into creating the pathing, and I will say, I think it turned out as well as I could have hoped because
I think it works really well.
My rough percentages going in was because, to back up a little bit, I actually had to convince Chris to do the paths because his whole thing, understandably, was that's a lot of extra content that people aren't going to see unless they play all the way through. And so I had to lobby so hard for it and convince him that it really wouldn't be that much additional content. And honestly, it's not. It feels like a tremendous amount of
it's
content.
It's the key scenes. Like the business with I'm forgetting her real name, but Lucy Love, the strip in her room.
Yeah.
Texas is most sinister. The stuff at the ending, like the occasional clip, but again, nobody else was doing anything close to that. So it really, it really worked for me.
So for example, we had to tweak it quite a bit because what I wanted ideally was for about maybe 60% of people who played to get the Lombard Street ending, 60 to 70%. And then people who really wanted to go the dark path could get to it fairly easily. And so I figured maybe there'd be 10 to 15%. Everyone else would probably, once they found out there were multiple paths, try to get someone to tell them how to get the Mission Street ending because that's what so many of the fans were longing for. But as it turned out, maybe 5% of people got that, even trying to find it. And that was perfect because it made it this elusive goal that motivated people to go back and replay.
Do you know what the absolute elusive goal is of Pandora Directive? It's that the game box lies to you. It says there are 2 Mission Street endings, and there's just one. So the game box.
Well, no. And ending 1 is that you get it and you're satisfied. Ending 2. While we're talking about morality, because I mean, I'm currently designing a game where you're playing a vampire. So there's a lot of sort of nasty options that you can do. And I'm kind of curious to just kind of comparison that because Tex is generally such a nice guy, how much do you think it's relevant having the bad options there to be chosen versus not to be chosen? That kind of element of, having to actively stay on the straight and narrow rather than necessarily wanting to see Tex become a bastard.
So you're talking about what the motivation is for the player?
No, more for you as a writer. Like, do you see those the path thing as like the option to play Tex that way, or do you think that the options to play him nice and not do that in themselves kind of an interesting kind of gameplay element?
I thought it was fascinating. I mean, I enjoyed it so much. In fact, one of the things that makes that darker path seem so dark is that a lot of the voiceovers are different. So the actual cutscenes are, the major ones are different, but a lot of the other ones are exactly the same. But how Tex contextualizes the scene, where he says, I'm going to go talk to this guy and I'll do whatever it takes to get the information. If I got to rough him up, I'll do it. So you're coming into the scene with the idea of Tex is a desperate man who's willing to do a lot of things. It ends up playing out the exact same way it does on the other paths, but it feels different. And so those voiceovers create a mood that goes throughout that entire path. And to me, taking Tex in that direction was it was just really fun as a writer. And for Chris, he was overjoyed because he loves dark film noir. Like he loves Mike Hammer stuff, where he's roughing up the dame, and he's shooting people for no reason. And so he just was in fantasy land by getting to be this badass guy. And it's so funny how many fans are turned off by that version of Tex, and Tex himself loved it. So
I mean, it's kind of interesting because obviously I don't know Chris Jones. I think we spoke to him once, but when you're playing through the games, you can sort of see a certain awkwardness with some of the dark stuff. The oh my hell instead of oh my god. Trying to avoid swearing, not drinking or smoking or something. Even though like
Cap is actually on the whiskey bottle.
That's the kind of thing. So it's kind of amusing that he's sort of like into the dark side of it.
No, he's it's probably true for a lot of people that live their lives a certain way. He's always been a family man, conservative, grew up in a nice neighborhood. I think there's this little bit of fantasy element for him. I didn't grow up in a religious household, and so I got to be a complete lunatic in my 20s, and I was able to get that out of my system. Chris never really got that opportunity, so I think for him it's just fun to play at that.
Speaking also of not just Pandora, but previous games, Martian Memorandum also in particular, the existence of extraterrestrial life in the Tex Murphy universe is, the more I think about it, the more prevalent it is. I mean, how many alien races technically exist in Tex's world? You've got the Martian civilization. You've got whatever the hell crashed in Roswell. You've also got the alien fart cloud, who I assume is a third species. How many little green men are...
The Mayan one as well, the one which landed in the forest.
Isn't that the same race?
The same species.
Oh, that might not be actually. So how many little green men are running around Tex's world?
That's a wonderful question. You'd have to ask Archie Ellis, I guess.
Oh, let's just hope he doesn't bite it.
No, I think that's the beauty of me writing through Tex's eyes, is that I don't necessarily need to know if Tex doesn't know. And so I know that's a bit of a cop-out answer, but I think for Tex, he still doesn't even really quite believe it. I think there's a part of him that's kind of like, well, I did see something that looked like a spaceship, but I did see this evil fart cloud, but who knows what it was, So he lives in the present.
Well, it's kind of like the Indiana Jones rule that in every movie he has to be convinced that the supernatural thing is real, even though by this point it should just be God's appeared. Yeah, I'll do it on Friday.
Well, I will say that one thing that Chris and I talked about very early on in development of Under Killing Moon was that if we laugh at ourselves first, or we poke fun at the content of our stories, or whatever, it's going to make it much harder for people to gang up on us. And so it's the people, I think, who take themselves so seriously and think whatever it is they're working on is just the next great Citizen Kane. You're setting yourself up to be, have holes punched in you. And so I think for us, it was, let's just take it nice and easy and light, as you pointed out, Richard. Under Killing Moon was really played for laughs first, and then, drama and thriller acts.
With Pandora, was the change in style at least partly like, well, we've done it now, we're fairly confident we can do it, we don't have to lean on the goofball stuff? Or was it just more of a natural progression for the story that you wanted to tell?
I think, again, because Chris had been in the business for a while and I was relying on his insight about most of this stuff, his feeling was that if we're going to take a lot of chances with this, let's make sure we are good-natured about it. Make the character likable, and make sure people have fun and have some laughs and things like that. Because this was such new technology, and some of the early stuff we'd seen wasn't very good. And so we thought, we would love for people to actually embrace what we're doing. But on the off chance it doesn't really meet their expectations, let's just keep it light and fun. And then once we realized, no, we can actually do this, we can actually do something that's much more movie-like, then that was the next step with Pandora.
I can't think of many games that have had such, and I liked Under Killing Moon, I bought it back on release, but I can't think of many games which have had such a dramatic jump in storytelling quality, between two entries. Obviously the direction, Chris's Tex, so much better at acting in that one, and of course the writing, it genuinely impressed me. When I was kind of playing through it, it's like it felt like we sort of jumped from like game 1 to game 5 or something like that. So
it was kind of just a perfect storm, I guess, of things coming together. Both having technology to take some big leaps forward, and then bringing someone in who, even though I didn't have a ton of experience writing long form narrative, I did understand game design and had enough writing experience to see how the two could be blended together. And that was one point I always wanted to make, and one error I think a lot of other games made, is it felt like the story and game were really separate. And so you'd play some game, get some story, play some game, get some story. And I was like, whatever we can do to integrate the story as much as possible within the game, the better it's going to be. And so just fortunate that I had the aptitude for it and people liked it.